Remember, kids, it's not how long it takes you to get to space that counts, it's how many of your employees peed in bottles to help you get there. Welcome back to Storytime. I've moved. Today we are going to be examining Iron Man 2, or Ironer Man. This is, of course, the 2010 sequel to Iron Man, and the third entry overall in the MCU. It definitely features the return of all your favorite cast members, in addition to introducing not one, but two dynamic new villains. While it sports thrilling action sequences, at heart it's an introspective movie about accountability for one's actions and confronting one's past in the face of mortality. Just kidding, it's about using your wealth and knowledge to the most self-serving way possible while creating lots of problems for other people, all while managing to have a lazier story than your predecessor. No holds will be barred as far as spoilers and criticism go, so if that's a problem.
Begone, vile man! Begone from me!
Ironer Man, as its prequel, is directed by Jon Favreau. It was written by Justin Theroux, who was primarily known as an actor and whose only writing credit before this movie was Tropic Thunder. Apparently, he came recommended by Robert Downey Jr., who of course was in that movie, playing Colonel Rhodes in his first film appearance.
What do you mean, you people?
Let's look at our primary characters. Tony is the billionaire CEO of Stark Industries, a company that definitely does something. Off-screen, the following things have happened to Tony since we last saw him. He no longer works with S.H.I.E.L.D., even though we saw him working with S.H.I.E.L.D. as an official emissary to General Ross in Incredible Hulk. He is also apparently no longer with Pepper, as had been implied by the ending of the first film. This comes across as that having just not ever happened rather than the two of them not knowing how to proceed or taking a break or something. Finally, he has developed palladium poisoning from the palladium core his heart reactor thing uses, a component of its operation that was definitely explained to us in film 1 and wasn't conjured out of the air to create the illusion of a ticking clock for a plot that barely exists.
It's poison, I tell you, it's poison!
As Tony relates to us in his opening monologue, his main concern in this episode is his legacy, due to his apparently impending mortality. Legacy is never really specifically defined, but it seems like to Tony and everyone else it mostly means how he is remembered and seen by others. To shore up his legacy, he holds the first Stark Expo in 35 years to promote the sharing of knowledge, and then patently refuses to share his knowledge about the Iron Man suit. We'll get to this. We also learned that, like all men in the MCU, Tony has not insignificant daddy issues. Yet another small contradiction with movie 1. Remember when he was proud to be a Stark and condoned his father's way of doing things? Psych, it was all a ruse, Howard, bad daddy. Pepper is essentially unchanged. When the movie remembers she exists, she's running things at Stark Industries, either behind the scenes or as actual CEO, a promotion she gains early in the film and which never means anything important to the plot. Mostly she is just always on the phone and too busy to communicate with Tony, so he has no one to process his life with, so that part of the plot can't happen. It really feels like the B story for an episode of Cheers where Ted Danson tells Shelley Long she can run the bar for a day after she calls him lazy and says anyone could do it, and she learns it's actually complicated work after getting into hijinks involving the various drunks in Boston and then they make up blah 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 blah. Colonel Rhodes is still with Air Force, where his primary role is apparently to babysit/spy on/pressure Tony to turn over the suit to the government, but also to prevent Air Force from forcibly seizing it themselves, something they can definitely do and which the movie treats like an actual threat. When Tony goes too far in his irresponsible behavior at a private party in his own home, Rhodes, acting in his capacity as Air Force Colonel, steals a suit and takes it to Air Force, a thing they are proud of him for doing and which is definitely legal. This is later played off as Tony allowing it, but Rhodes didn't know that at the time and Air Force didn't know it ever. Initially hesitant to arm the suit when ordered to do so, Rhodes quickly changes his mind for no reason and proceeds to arm the dickens out of it. He eventually ends up as Tony's sidekick, which has evidently been his dream the whole time. Also, we still don't know how long or why they are friends. New villain number 1 is Justin Hammer, a competitor of Tony's. I guess technically former competitor since Stark doesn't make weapons anymore.
That we know of yet.
But they are treated like rivals. It doesn't make sense. Hammer has taken up Stark Industries' government contracts, but is shown to be pretty inept. We don't know anything specific about his past, but I get the sense he hasn't been like a big player for very long, and I think he feels vulnerable about it. He wants to ruin Tony's legacy, a thing he doesn't define, apparently out of pettiness because Tony is a dick to him in public and a Vanity Fair profile can make or break anyone in the weapons business with the ream of exclusive government contracts. New villain number 2 is Ivan from Russia. His father was Howard Stark's former partner back in the day until Howard had him deported for spying, which then got him sent to Siberia for some reason. Ivan is a physicist, which in this movie means all-purpose scientist, software developer, computer hacker, and metallurgist, and not a guy using math to calculate and define physical forces. He also wants to ruin Tony's legacy, a thing he doesn't define, for the more understandable reason that Tony's family basically ruined his life. As usual, only our protagonist... Oh yeah, we have another girl. This one is a fight girl. She is, for all intents and purposes, a generic S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. I think the movie kind of half-heartedly tries to sell her as Pepper's replacement, something that doesn't go anywhere because we don't really have any understanding of Pepper and Tony's current relationship in the first place. Basically, her presence allows Tony to be a horn dog and sexual harasser of an employee, which the movie plays off as him just being him. Typical guys.
What's better than this? Guys being dudes.
As usual, only our protagonist... Also, Nick Fury shows up for real. He is mostly just an exposition machine so that we can learn of Tony's daddy issues and so that Tony can have something to do in the second act because the story doesn't know what to do with him since it won't let him talk to Pepper, who I do have to say is not being a not toxic partner in this movie. As usual, only our protagonist is very thoroughly characterized, although here it's mostly just carryover from film 1. The new stuff feels very unattached. Specifically, Tony's main concern in this movie, his legacy, goes totally out the window the minute Nick Fury gives him his homework. The other characters also only serve to bring Tony whatever other plot there is. So, why does everything feel so detached, especially if we know what characters want? Seems like with that stuff in place we'd have a story. But... once again, we don't have a story that makes any sense. Tony is worried about his legacy because he knows he will die soon. His desire that motivates the plot is to do something that will shore up his legacy, whatever that means. The villains, both Hammer and Ivan, want to tear down Tony's legacy. This seems like it would be a very clear point of conflict, but it's not. The reason for this is that none of these characters really know anything about their opponent's desires, therefore they meet no real resistance, therefore no conflict. Let me lay this out. Hammer doesn't know that Tony is terminally ill, and both he and Ivan don't know that Tony's main desire at the moment is to build his legacy. But all their planning and plotting take this as a given, which is weird given how Tony's entire public persona seems to have been built around not caring what people think, courting scandal, and upending convention. They are attacking something they have no reason to believe Tony cares about. It'd be like trying to humiliate Mr. Rogers by reviling his love of classic cars. Like, it's possible he's into that, but nothing in his show would ever lead you to believe that. You're just guessing. Of course, here there is also the angle that the public cares a lot about how Tony is seen, even if he doesn't. The film does show that since coming out as Iron Man, Tony has become something of a god whom people believe in, even though we don't see him do anything. This feels like pandering? Fandering? Rather than characterization. We don't see Tony do anything heroic with the suit the entire movie. And no, blindly provoking a fight in a crowded public area he refuses to leave doesn't count. It's basically saying that if you, as a viewer, were a fan of the first movie, Ivan and Hammer are your enemies because they resent your fanness and don't see anything of value in Tony. Not like me, of course. If, in this story, we see Tony actively being heroic and doing good in the face of corruption, this makes sense. Since we don't, it has nothing to stand on. While Ivan and Hammer don't know anything about Tony, Tony doesn't know anything about them either. It's true Ivan tells Tony why he attacked him at the race, but Tony seems mostly unconcerned by this. Apart from doing a little research on Ivan for exposition purposes, he doesn't think about it again. It certainly doesn't lead him to revisit safety plans for the expo or reevaluate his father or his own role in the company, and he knows nothing about Hammer's plan for building suits until he sees them in person when he flies to the expo. So, for most of the movie, Tony is left to haphazardly deal with his legacy, which mostly consists of being ignored by Pepper when he's trying to open up. You know, the thing she wanted in the last movie and has, I guess, forgotten about.
Oh no! We left Grandpa back at the gas station!
The overall effect is basically that all three guys are just coincidentally concerned with the same thing, which isn't a plot, or at least not a good one. But it could be with just the smallest of adjustments. For Tony, there are a couple of options. One is that he just has to be aware of something being afoot somewhere. Maybe he hears that Ivan broke out of jail or finds out that Hammer has been trying to negotiate some kind of hostile takeover of Stark Industries to access his suits. Anything to make him suspicious and start thinking about a plan. This will also give him more exigency to fix his palladium condition.
So, poisoning.
I know this is a weird thing to say since he is literally dying, but the situation never feels that urgent in the movie. Of course our hero isn't going to die by palladium poisoning, but since nothing else bad that he knows of will happen if he doesn't fix it, it's kind of a hollow source of conflict in the story, at least for us as viewers. Tony's other option could be having a drive to do something really altruistic for once. Say, finishing his father's work on the new element to give the world a clean new source of energy, for instance. If, once he has made it, he discovers that it could replace the palladium, it all feels way less selfish and contains a moral. To help yourself, sometimes you have to help others. Something that might be good for a narcissist like Tony to learn as he becomes a hero. As it is, he makes a pioneering scientific breakthrough that has the potential to revolutionize energy the world over to save his life and nothing more. Not an ignoble reason, of course, but one that in the context of the story just feels like a self-serving deus ex machina. So those are Tony's options. On Ivan and Hammer's end, they need to know more or anything about Tony's desires. Ivan apparently knows about Tony's palladium poisoning for some reason, but this doesn't motivate him to act any differently. And Hammer, who I must say again is not actually a competitor of Stark Industries since they don't make weapons,
That we know of.
knows nothing at all of Tony. I get he's like the secondary villain, but his pettiness does not help to sell the potential threat he poses to Tony and others. He needs to be the amoral flip side of Tony, the guy who will abuse the Iron Man tech and be an actual threat in himself. He tries to do this, but because he is so bad at it, we don't really ever take him seriously. The movie would be the same if instead Ivan had just stolen the Hammer suits for himself, like from the factory, and Hammer made no appearance. This is how you know you've written a weak character. This is all a mess, but maybe we're trying to read too deeply into it. Everyone knows that plot, story, and character are all the most minor of considerations in a good porno, and since that's actually kind of what we have here, we've briefly gone over the film's lackluster characterization and hastily assembled plot. While these types of issues are par for the course for the MCU, here they might be a feature, not a bug. Because what we haven't talked about is the film's other problematic aspect, how it loves on billionaires. This film was released in 2010, which was obviously a different time. It was a post-Occupy world, but I don't think Billionaires took up the same amount of cultural air they do now. There certainly wasn't as much critical discourse around them as we find today. While not revered as pillars of civilization, I don't think they were really caricatured as villains either. They were your Gateses and your Bransons, philanthropic geeks and adventurous cartoon characters. Regardless of what most people thought then, Iron Man loves and venerates billionaires in ways that would certainly have been issues at the time, but that now in retrospect are very cringy and get in the way of the story. Here's my hot take. In a movie with any kind of conscience, Tony Stark would be the antagonist. And I don't mean that here he's portrayed as a misunderstood, complicated anti-hero. I mean that in any other movie, this character is a supervillain. Let me show you. Using his limitless resources accumulated from being a literal weapons dealer, Tony builds a combat suit powerful and threatening enough to be a nuclear deterrent.
Schindler and I are like peas in a pod. We're both factory owners. We both made shells for the Nazis, but mine worked, damn it.
He uses it at his own will and pleasure to bring about his own goals, some of which involve revenge and all of which involve asserting his own personal dominance.
He must be very proud.
No, not while my greatest nemesis still provides our customers with free light, heat, and energy. I call this enemy the sun.
He defies reasonable government regulation by ridiculing elected officials, megalomaniacally maintaining that he alone can wield this kind of power, and casting himself as the victim of big government overreach.
I'm not the thief. The government is.
Every year you make hard-working Joes like my reporter friend here pay income taxes. And for what?
Then he instigates a fight in a public place, leaving thousands of people in mortal danger. The only reason he's not actually a villain is that he didn't intend to endanger lives. Actually, the only reason he's not a villain is that this movie goes out of its way to justify every selfish thing Tony does as pragmatic and laudable. Ridiculing a senator in an official hearing? Justified, because even though the questions he is asking are really pretty reasonable, he's just so annoying. Claiming a monopoly on world peace? Justified, because of course ends like that justify such means. The fact that the Iron Man suit has touched off a new arms race with hostile foreign powers? Justified, because no one could ever be as smart as Tony Stark. Look how bad their robots are, it's fine. The things that happen in this movie are any billionaire industrialist's secret fantasy. Dismantling any and all government regulation of your industry, which of course is a violation of all of your civil rights, through the coolness of you and your product? Publicly dunking on hostile officials and subpar competitors while gaining the reverence of the masses? Being smarter, cooler, and better looking than anyone in the room at any given time? Driving a race car? Sexually harassing your employees? Being literally the most powerful single person in the entire world and having the accompanying freedom to go and do wherever and whatever you want, knowing there is nothing anyone can do to stop you? This is how Jeff Bezos gets off. But that's not all. The movie has this weird obsession with the wonder of technology. Howard says that all things are possible through technology and dedicated the first Stark Expo to that purpose. This thought is fine enough by itself, that innovation and transnational collaboration will bring about new discoveries that benefit humanity. But the way the movie frames this is super gross. Because Howard is not some Thomas Edison, inventing things that benefit people around the world and make life easier or more enjoyable, even though he's kind of a shady guy. He is primarily a maker of weapons. You know, things designed explicitly to oppress and kill people. The first Stark Expo takes place in 1974, while the Vietnam War is still ongoing. This would certainly mean Stark was supplying weapons to be used there. Guns, mines, and other ordnance, napalm and Agent Orange, all of which would have disproportionately affected civilians and whose effects and threats would have lingered to the present day just like they do now in our world. Howard is the industrial face of late American colonialism, of propagating American ideals of freedom and technology through violence and subjugation. But, and this is the creepy part, he is coded strongly as a benevolent Walt Disney figure presenting his dream for a futuristic wonderland. As a result, the film unironically characterizes the American military-industrial complex of the 20th and 21st centuries as an engine for the betterment of all mankind. Yeah. This is not challenged by our antagonist Tony. The film condones all of his actions with circuitously specious reasoning the MCU will, sadly, reuse again and again. Wait your turn, Captain America. The film tells us that because Tony fights bad guys, anything he does must be good. He is right to keep his suits out of public hands because the public will inevitably misuse them. Just look at what happened with the hammer drones. The problem is not that the suits exist, it is that people who aren't as good and smart as Tony want them. This movie's Tony is an unintentionally prescient example of the billionaire behavior that has become such an issue today. One man causing problems no one is equipped to solve by doing whatever he wants when he wants to do it because he can. Some examples. Tony Stark stan Elon Musk wants to bring internet to the most remote corners of the world by launching tens of thousands of satellites with his name on them into low orbit, a thing he can just do. The fact that this sabotages much astronomical research is apparently of no consequence to him. What's more important is that a neo-colonial tool of economic conformity and exploitation be brought to everyone, whether they want it or not, while he capers around in a Wario costume on TV. Jeff Bezos runs sweatshops where people are regularly injured competing with packing robots so that the desk lamp made by slave labor in China or the Philippines arrives at your home in 2 days instead of 4 or 5, delivered by a driver who has to pee in a bottle on roads the company pays no taxes to help maintain, all while he burns up more fuel than you or I will ever use in our entire lives to get to space for like 4 minutes. Bar of sociopathic hand soap Mark Zuckerkorn operates the largest social network on the planet, a place where friends can gather to disseminate lies, conspiracies, and hate speech that drive the real world spread of disease, violence, and genocide, and which he most often chooses to do little or nothing to curb until the genocide is underway and politicians have encouraged their followers to mob violence. I want to be clear that the problem from a story perspective isn't that Tony behaves in the way that he does. Characters, even protagonists, are allowed, if not encouraged, to behave badly. The problem is that it goes entirely uncommented on within the story and is therefore accepted at face value. Tony is not good despite his sketchy past or his continued questionable behavior, he is just good. Either the storytellers are entirely unaware of the problematic material they are putting in their story, or they are fully aware. If they are ignorant, it shows a remarkable level of naivete in creating a huge mass-market movie designed to sell merch to children and fanboys.
Yeah, us too!
If they are not ignorant, then either they are expressly condoning such behavior or are intentionally ignoring it, which is basically the same thing. This feels particularly weird given that at the point this film was being made, Disney acquired Marvel Studios, adding to its already substantial holdings including ABC, ESPN, and Pixar. Since then, Disney has acquired much more, including Lucasfilm, 20th Century Fox, and Hulu. Using its increasing market share, it can do whatever it wants, including strong-arming exhibitors into disadvantageous deals and ignoring contracts with its artists. With its own streaming service and controlling interest in another, it can decide to forego theatrical exhibition entirely without suffering any significant financial shortfall. Disney does this not for the betterment of culture or even its own employees, who, if they work at theme parks, are not often paid livable wages. Please think about this next time you complain about your fried pickle. Disney, like Stark, does it because it can, and because no one is equipped to really do anything about it. One final parallel comes from Tony Stark himself, Robert Downey Jr. After the success of Iron Man, he demanded an increase in pay, by some reports as much as 2,000%. Terrence Howard, who had received the highest salary on Film One and who had a 3-picture deal, was subsequently informed his role would be reduced and that he would be taking a pay cut, by some reports as much as 80%. When he refused, he was replaced. Not to be reductive, but the white guy who, though talented, had alienated himself with his industry by being hard to work with and basically uninsurable due to a raging drug problem, failed up, ultimately hijacking one of the biggest film franchises in history. The black guy, for wanting to make sure his contract was honored, got the boot.
Be gone from me!
So, yeah, Iron Man 2, whether it meant to be or not, is emblematic of pretty much everything that is rotten in our late capitalist cultural and economic system. The petty squabbles of the super rich precipitate problems no one can do anything about while they ignore existing and pressing problems their resources might actually help solve. Because they can. In our world, it's an expanding wealth gap, a deepening climate crisis, and persistent and festering prejudices against women, racial minorities, and other groups. In Tony's, it's endangering civilian lives with armed robots and reckless flying.
Can't stop Debbie Downer!
The fact that the movie, whether it means to or not, so fully embodies these characteristics and very often glorifies them is something that needs to be taken into account while critically appraising it, especially now that it's over 10 years old. Turns out movies can be about stuff even when they're not. Here's some other stuff if you're still watching. 1. Tony has a suit that somehow folds into a suitcase-sized package and can be easily carried by Pepper, but is also strong enough to not get chopped through with laser lightning whips even though Rolls-Royces and Formula One cars can get chopped through. This begins the trend of Tony just having new suits that are, for all intents and purposes, magic, and which make the story, which still takes place in the real world, feel less plausible. I'm feeling petty, so let's dig into this. An average adult man will have a total surface area of roughly 22 square feet. I'm sure that much material can be packed into a suitcase-sized object, that's not the point. My question is, how much would it weigh? We don't know what the suit is made of, but since it's clearly only an emergency suit for travel, we'll go with something light but protective. Say titanium. Calculating the weight for a 22 square foot, quarter-inch thick sheet of titanium, we get a figure of roughly 135 pounds. But since we see the suit has layers of armor and skeletal structure as well as moving and connecting components, it's probably safe to double the amount of material for a top-end estimate of 270 pounds, probably twice the weight of Pepper. Obviously, it's possible Tony has come up with a lighter metal, but even this much aluminum would likely weigh in excess of 150 pounds. What I'm saying is that either Tony has off-screen come up with a metal alloy stronger than the stuff they use to build race car chassis and which weighs like 5 times less than aluminum, or the storytellers don't care about explaining powers. Which one might it be? 2. The vintage footage of Howard Stark is from 1974, but what he's wearing looks more like 1964? The high buttoning jacket, the square handkerchief, the narrow tie. Unnecessary confusion resulting from the creepy invocation of Walt Disney. 3. It definitely feels like Ivan should be a lot more hurt or dead than he is from being slammed into a wall by a vehicle moving at speed. Like...
What does that mean, pinned?
I don't know, maybe they make him tougher in Russia. 4. What does Stark Industries do? They don't appear to have any government contracts, but they are apparently doing very well. Doing something. It seems like it is potentially energy related. There's talk of wind farms or something, but it's vague. I bring this up because it feels like a missed opportunity. One of the big things from film 1 was Tony stepping away from making weapons. Maybe now he has started marketing commercial models of the arc heart reactor thing, revolutionizing green energy. But people are misusing it, causing problems Tony feels like he has to solve in order to save his legacy. This is a conflict naturally arising from his idealism and hasty thinking, and forcing him to confront the nature of his suits. Instead, we get nothing. Also, if they aren't making weapons anymore,
that we know of.
Where does Tony get the weapons for his suits? And if they are making weapons, why? Also, where do you mail order components for an atomic accelerator? 5. We've already run into undefined powers in this movie, and we're here again, this time with Ivan. Since we don't know really what the arc energy pulses in Tony's suit do, I brought this up in the other video. Are they just energy blasts? Do they have a heat element? Is it like a plasma thing? We also don't really know what Ivan's little whippies do. I mean, we see them cut through metal and shoot out electric zaps, but the cause and duration of these effects is unknown. We therefore don't know how much danger Tony is in or the potential for this technology. While we're here, I'm not sure Ivan's plan makes much sense. Not that it has to, he's a crazy person, but it seems like he goes to Monaco to confront Tony. Feels like he has a plan to go there. We don't know how he knows Tony's private plans though. So maybe it's just he knows a Stark race car will be there at the race, and so that's where he's decided to make Tony bleed, and it's just lucky that Tony happens to be in town, and then it's even more lucky that Tony impulsively decides to drive. But the movie plays it like Ivan's plan the whole time was to chop Tony. He goes out on the track in order to catch the Stark car, then proceeds to try and kill the driver, who it seems like he knows is Tony. What I'm saying is that in the effort to keep Ivan's capabilities a secret from the audience, his plan seems like a monumental piece of luck. 6. I do quite like Mickey Rourke's work with this character. He has a great look and is always interesting to watch. It's just a shame that he's so underwritten. 7. I think the whole palladium thing works better as a complication than a starting point. In the story we get, Tony has already tried everything. We therefore don't get to see him really working on the problem. Any work he does is mainly just exposition for us, telling us how much time he's got left or whatever. If, however, he discovers the issue early in the movie, say after the fight with Ivan, we can see him work to try and solve it, and when that fails, pivot into accepting his mortality and thinking about his legacy. The main plot then becomes something of an arms race. Tony knows he has to do something to stop whatever Ivan and Hammer have planned, but if he gets in the suit again, it might kill him before he can stop them. As it is, it kind of feels like we've just skipped the first act of the story. 8. I found myself curious about why Tony still needs the arc heart thing. I mean, I get why it was needed in the first place, but I don't know why doctors in a non-cave setting couldn't do something about the shrapnel in the intervening months. Or, if they can't, why Tony isn't working to develop some new thing to get it out. I mean, if the palladium is killing him, and there are no alternatives for the core of the reactor, the apparent impossibility of extracting the shrapnel needs a little explanation, otherwise it seems like we just forgot about something. 9. At the end of the movie, Agent Guy finds a hammer in a pit in New Mexico. If you know what the hammer means, this is probably cool, but if you don't, like I didn't the first time I watched this movie, it's kind of like, Oh, look at that old hammer. Wait, this is what we're ending the movie on? And I think that's it. All told, this movie is probably the worst of the series so far for a couple of reasons. One, of course, is that once again, the story we are presented with is extremely underdeveloped. The characters are all pretty flat, and while their motivations are clear enough, the overall conflict is coincidental at best. The other reason is that this movie has aged really poorly. Watching it this summer, petty billionaires had a cat fight about who would go to space first while the country was on fire and a plague continued to spread freely around the world really highlighted the film's problematic themes. What was once maybe fairly innocent now leaves a bad taste in the mouth and raises questions about the heroic legitimacy of a main character going forward in the series that, shocker, won't ever get addressed. Anyway, I hope this was interesting, if a little long. Join me next time when we'll be looking at Thor, the movie that puts the Dutch angles in wholly overusing Dutch angles, Batman. Good night.
Guys being dudes.
It's poison, I tell you, it's poison.